3, 2, 1, and go. Good morning, everybody, or at least it's morning where I am. It's great to be with you. This is our first session for the new year, and I hope everybody had a good holiday. Today, what we're going to talk about are table calculations. And to be honest with you, I've kind of put this off for a while because it's such a large topic. We're going to get into it today. We're going to talk about when you use them, where you use them. We're going to talk about syntax, and then we're going to also look at some use cases. Now, for the most part, this is the table we're going to be using. We've got segments. There's 3 segments, and there are 4 years, so there's 12 data points that we're going to be looking at. Now, the table itself is actually the aggregation of 10,000 rows of data. This is Superstore data. It's the same data set that you have. It came with your copy of Tableau. There's 10,000 actual records. It gets summed up to the 12 records that you see here, and it's what we're going to be using during the first half of this presentation. Now, the table itself, and we talk about table calculations, we're talking about the table that you see. We're not talking about the 10,000 rows of detailed data. We're talking about the 12 marks that you see here in this table. And you and I both know it doesn't actually look like that. This looks like an Excel table. The actual table in the data set is tall and thin, and it looks like this table over here. When we talk about table calculations, we talk about 2 things. We talk about scope and we talk about direction. Scope is how much of the table is used in the calculation, and direction is either across, that's across the columns, and across is positive going to the right and negative going to the left, or we talk about down, the vertical dimension. Down is positive, going down, negative, going up. Now, we can't talk about table calculations without talking about the order of operations. And the order of operations is just the sequence that Tableau goes through as you create your worksheet. And each worksheet has its own data table, and that data table is the only data available for that worksheet. Table calculations are last in that order of operation. They're in the 10th step. You create the table in steps 3, 4, and 5, and that's where fixed LODs are calculated in step 4. Once the table is created, the rest of the order of operations, steps 6 through 10, just loads that table with data, manipulates that data, and does some calculations. Now, because the table calculations are last in the order of operation, they can use the results of anything that's calculated before that. So you could use fixed LODs in your table calculation. But you would not be able to use the results of a table calculation embedded in an LOD because those are calculated before the table calculation is actually done. Now, all table calculations have a similar syntax. This first phrase here is a key phrase. It tells Tableau how to aggregate the data going across that summary table that, in our case, it's going to be 12 values. It tells Tableau how to do that aggregation. This first argument inside the parentheses tells Tableau how to take that detailed data, the 10,000 record data, and how to aggregate it up to the 12 records that we're looking at. And then there's 2 options here, the start and the finish. They're not always used, but they tell Tableau where in the table to start this calculation and where to finish it. I want to take a look at an example here so that the table that we're going to start with is the same table with the 12 values in it. And first I want to take a look at window sum. And we're just going to bring this up here and take a look at it. Window sum is our keyword. So it says we're going to sum these values, and the aggregation we're going to use is the sum of sales. Well, sum of sales is right here. This is sales, and this is the sum of sales. We know we're going across. I can open up this. If you see this little triangle here, we open that up and we can see that we're going across the table. So we're going to window sum across the table from the first record to the last record. So all these values are the same, and that's the total of consumers is 1,000,001, total corporate, total home office. We could have also used this calculation, and this is the average of the sum. We're still taking the sum, which is the values that we see here in the first frame, and now instead of summing across the window, we're taking the average across the window. So this 290,000 is the average of these four values. And 176,000 is the average of those four values. So you see how this first keyword tells Tableau how to aggregate across the table, and this argument inside the parentheses tells Tableau how to sum the detailed records. Now we could also have used average sales, and if we wanted to, we could take the sum of the average sales. Okay. And that just looks like this. We're taking the window sum of the average. So now this 908 is the sum of these four values. And the 921 is the sum of those four values. So you see how these two work in concert. This is the aggregation from the detail table, and this is the aggregation across the table that you see. I want to just give you a little example of how to use this start and finish. We're going to take a quick look at this. And this is that same calculation again. We're going to take a look at window sum. We're going to look at those four values, and we're going to look across the table. But now we're using these two different arguments in here, first and last. We want to start one record to the left. Cross negative is to the left of the current cell. So we're going from one record to the left of the cell to the current cell. So that this value is the sum of those two values. We go up one record to the left and total, sum of sales. This is the sum of those two values, and this is the sum of those two values. So first tells us where to start, last tells us where to end in the table that you see. And there's 5 more table functions that are used to navigate the table, get around the table, if you will. First and last reference the first row and column in the table, or the last row and column in the table. Index is just counts across the table, going to the right, 1 through 7 here, or down would be 1 through 5. Just sequentially counts across the rows or columns. Lookup is very similar to the offset function in Excel. From the table, or from the cell that you're already in, how far do you want to move over and how far do you want to move up? You'd use a lookup function to retrieve the value in that cell and bring it back. And previous value looks at the immediately preceding cell in either the row or the column that you're already in. Let's take a look and see how some of these work. I want to start same table again. I want to take a look at using window to get the running sum. Okay. This calculation again says we're going to sum across these values. We're going to use the sum of sales. We're going to start at the first column and total to the current column, so that this value will be the sum of those two. This value, once again, will start at the first and will sum to the current, so it's the sum of these 3 values, and this is the sum of all 4 values, okay? First and last, okay? Well, what does lookup do? Lookup will go to a specific cell. This simply says, well, if I'm already at this cell, I want to go up to the sum of sales, that's this group here, and I want to go minus 1. So we're going minus to the left. So this value is returned, then I go up 1, and that value is returned, and then I go up and over to the left 1. Okay? Well, if that's what, lookup does, what does previous value do? Well, previous value is going to look in the same row or column. We're going to start here, and previous value is going to return this value, the 266,000. Now we're in this cell, and we're going to look back in the same row or column. So we're going to return the 266 1,000 again, all the way across. And I've got an example here. Excuse me, I have to just move my face. I've got an example here of how you can use previous value to do a running total or to do a running product. And for this, it's a little easier rather than seeing all those large numbers from the Superstore data set. All I did was create an index. So I had the numbers of the columns, and this is just a simple example of index. This just counts across the rows, so it's across the columns, so it's columns 1, 2, 3, and 4 for each one of those values. And now I want to use this. This is using previous value to calculate the running total. All this says is take the index and the current value and add it to the previous value in that same row. So I'm taking 1 and 2 to get 3. I'm taking 3 and 3 to get 6. I'm taking 4 and 6 to get 10. Okay. We're going to show you some use cases where this comes into play and why we would use this. You can also calculate the product going across the column. 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 4 is 24. So you can calculate the product. These two come in very useful when we start doing nested table calculations. Now there's one more topic that I want to cover, and then we're going to get into some use cases here. And that's the idea of using the calculation editor. Whenever you have a table calculation, you'll see this triangle here. If you open up that triangle and come down to Edit Table Calculation, a window opens up. And this window is very useful in understanding the scope and direction. The window will highlight both the scope and the direction, and this is table down, so this is going all the way down the table. And it's calculating, this happens to be the percent of total going down the table. We could also go across the table. And this is one that you're going to use quite often when you look at the specific dimension, and we're going to restart this with each category. Okay, so now here, because I've restarted this with each category, I get the total of the 3 segments within the category. If I did not do that, we would get the total all the way down the table. And if I just drag, we can see the total all the way down the table to see that we're calculating down. Now I want to get into some use cases. One of the most frequent use cases that we see in terms of questions involve calculating, first determining the top n or the top n values in a data set, and then summing or totaling those top n values. We're going to use this data set. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit to make it a little easier to see. We're going to use this data set, and it's just the sum of sales by subcategory and by category in Superstore data. Now there's what I'd like to do is I'd like to calculate the top n, and we do that using another table calculation. That's a ranking function. All ranking functions, and there's a number of different varieties here, rank and rank dense and rank unique. All ranking functions are table calculations. We have to look across the table, so we have to use a table calculation as opposed to a simple calculation. And all this does is it looks at the sum of sales descending, and then we're going to open up the editor again. We're going to go down the table, and we're going to restart every category. So we get the values 1 through 4, and then we restart again, values 1 through 7, or 1 through 9, and then the values 1 through 4. So we know what the top n are, or we know what the rank is. I also created a parameter here, and this is just a parameter so that we can we'll show you what the parameter is. All this does is it's just an integer that I can use to say, well, how many do we want? And we're going to look at the top two. And then I created a filter based on that parameter. And we'll take a look at that filter. And it's just a true false filter, a Boolean filter. And it just says, well, if the rank, if this value is less than or equal to the parameter value 2, then return a true. If not, return a false. Now I'd like to take a look, and what we want to do is we want to calculate a running total as we go down each one of these categories, and then we only want to see the top 2 or the top n in that category. So we're going to take a look at this. And here we've got window sum, and we're going to go down the table. We can see it right here. We're going to go down the table. Okay. If the rank, if this filter is true, then sum sales n from the first to the current position. And this is going to get us a running total. Now, what I wanted to show you is that you can use a conditional statement inside the table calculation. This is just a condition. This rank filter is going to return a true anytime that the rank is less than or equal to 2. And that's the values that we see here. I'm just going to change the sequence of these. Okay. And what I'd like to see is I just want to see this value and that. I just want to see that value when we get right down to it. I don't want to see all these other values. So we can come back in and we can write another formula. And this is the same sort of formula. And all this says is if the rank, and I put the rank unique right in here, so sum of sales descending is less than n, which is going to be 2 in our case, then show us the running total. We've nested a table calculation inside another table calculation, and if not, return a null. So we're going to drop that into our formula, and you can see, well, I've only got one value. Well, that's not what we wanted to see. Okay, got to come back in. We're going to open that up, use the editor, and just like we did before, we're going to start that table calculation every category. And now we're going to see these values. I want you to see something else. We've nested a table calculation. So each table calculation, and there's 3 of them here, have their own setup. And you'd open up each of these individually and make sure that they're set up right whenever you have a nested table calculation. So now we can see these values. I don't want to see them all. I only want to see the ones where the value is less than or equal to 2. So I've got a filter. I can filter those out. And I want to hide these because they don't add anything to the calculation. So we've got our table calculation. We know what our top n are, and we know what the total of the top n are. We'll put a parameter in here. We can change that, and the table will change accordingly. Okay. I want to move on to another type of calculation that we see quite often. And this comes about, sometimes we get people working in charitable organizations, and they have donors that send in donations on an annual basis or a regular period donation. And they want to calculate how frequently they do that. And what they really want to know is what is the most consecutive years each donor has donated. So we're going to use this table. This is 7 years worth of data, and we've got 3 donors and the amount that they donated each year. And what we're going to look at, what I want to do first is I want to identify each year that they gave. I don't really want to work with the values. I only want to know that they gave. They either gave or they didn't give. And here we're going to use a lookup formula inside of a condition. You know, if the lookup of the gift is greater than 0, enter a 1. So we're going to look up and we're going to see that, oh yes, this is greater than 0, so enter a 1. That's greater than 0, enter a 1. Nope, that's nothing, so put in a null, and so on. So we get these 3 and that one. Now what we'd like to do is count the consecutive years. And to do that, we're going to use one of those other expressions that we looked at previously. And we're going to look at this set of data. And if when I look up these values, if it's greater than 0, then take the previous value of this calculation and add the 1 to it. So as we do this, we get a 0 because there's nothing there. The first value, the second 2 values in a row. Oh, he has to start over again, get a 0, and then we start calculating down the table 1, 2, and 3. And this is an example using that previous value to calculate a running total. And then finally, what we want to do is we just want to look at the max value in each one of those columns. And we use yet another table calculation, window max. And window max is just going to go down each one of these columns, and we're looking down the columns, and it's going to find the maximum value in the column. Now you may be asking, you said, why am I using all these nested table calculations? If you remember, we looked at the order of operation. And once you start using table calculations, they can only be, the results of those table calculations can only be embedded in other table calculations. So that's why we're using all these table calculations. Now I got one more thing. I don't want to see all of this data. What I'd like to do is I'd like to only see the totals. And I'm going to use a last filter. If you remember, we talked about first and last. Last is the last row or last column, and it's 0 at the last row. So if last equals 0, then I want to see it, show that. If not, hide it. And I've created a show hide filter, and I can hide those values, and I'm only seeing the last row or column, and we can pull off what we don't want to see, and we can see that John's maximum number of consecutive years was 3, and Mary was 2, and Robert was 3. There's one other topic I just want to spend just a moment on, and it's the idea of using what I'm going to call light statistics, things like standard deviations, means, medians, variances, and how you would use them on a table or how you would use them on the detail table. Very often we'll get a question come in and someone will ask, and I say, well, I want to know what the standard deviation is of some values, and I can't get that standard deviation. There is a function in Tableau called standard deviation, and you can use that, and there's no problem using that, and it's going to return this set of values. And the standard deviation is actually the standard deviation from the detailed set of data. It's not from this set of data, it's from the 10,000 records. You know, the 10,000 records that are in the detailed data. And if we were to look at, and I've got to close this off to do this. Oops. If we were to look just at that detail, there are 466 rows in the detailed record for appliances, and the standard deviation of those 466 rows is that 389. Okay. Now, very often they say, well, this obviously isn't right because I want the standard deviation of these values, of the values from the table that you see. And to do that, there is a window calculation. Okay. And the window calculations, and you can see here, there's a number of window calculations. There's window standard deviation, there's median, correlation, the covariance and the variance. This calculation, window standard deviation of the sum of sales, looks down this entire column and returns the standard deviation of this column of data. So keep in mind, you have to think about what it is you really want the standard deviation of, or what you want the median of. And if it's the detailed data, you do not use a window calculation. If it's the values that you see in the screen, you use a window calculation. Okay. I want to thank you. That's what I wanted to cover off this morning. I have written this up And I have a blog post on it. It's called Table Calculations, When, Where, and How. This is my new blog site. You may be familiar, and you may have bookmarked my old blog. I have moved that blog, and I'm going to show you the link here in a second. It's just jimdehner.com. And I wrote up table calculations, and it's out here right now, and it's sitting out there. I put it out there on the 1st of January. These links will take you to my public site, to my LinkedIn site, and to my Twitter site. So please go out there and use it. I'd really like it if you followed me on Twitter, because that's where I announce all of my new posts. I also announce them on LinkedIn. This presentation and the workbook used in this presentation is already out on my Tableau public site. It looks like this. It's table calculations, when, where, and how, and it looks like this, and you can go out there and get it. And my contact information, this is the new blog site. It's just jimdehner.com, and there's Tableau public site, and my Twitter site is Market Analytic 5. They are all linked together, so if you go out to the blog site, you can go back and get to the other two. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next month. I'm done.